Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai. Welcome back to our weekly slow sessions, our Mettā Lab. Hope this finds you well. Let's begin by paying homage to the Triple Gem, homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dhamma, and homage to the Noble Sangha. So this is our second session of restarting Mettā Lab, and as we've covered before, we have developed Metta based on the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, and we had a recap last week. And we also developed the first doorway to Nibbana, or first profitable direction, also known as the painful practice with slow realization, so Dukkha Patipada, Dandabhinya. And in this series, we're also going to be developing Metta with the 7 enlightenment factors and also liberation of mind by loving kindness. Now, one of the notes that I published this week was how important it is to understand this first doorway to Nibbana because it forms the basis for developing Metta Ceto Vimutti, so liberation of mind by loving kindness, and also the basis for how we activate Metta with the 7 factors of enlightenment. So it's really good to be skilled at this meditation, but at the same time, don't worry if you're not quite skilled yet. This session will recap how we do the meditation, how we build the insight pathway or wisdom pathway, and hopefully it inspires and encourages to learn this better and to practice it and to also see different nuances and those sorts of things according to this meditation. So how to get the best out of this session? So again, keep an open mind. So listen to the Buddha's words fresh. Also remember that we try and do these sutta meditations from start to finish. And that's in order to understand the meaning and also to be inspired by the miracle of Buddha's instruction and also to remove any unskilled qualities so that we go from the wrong path to the Noble Eightfold path. So it's good to be okay with not understanding everything. I think this is also a very gradual practice, gradual training, and of course we make gradual progress. So be okay with new Pali words, different suttas that we have covered and maybe are not that familiar with. Just be okay with what's possible. And even if you pick up one thing that is helpful to one's practice, feel really good about that. Remember that we are learners or seekers, so we are developing this path together, trying to make right effort together and encouraging each other to walk this path. And apply yourself to the meditation. So after I recap the insight pathway, we'll do a short meditation and then we'll tackle questions and answers. So apply yourself to the meditation as best as you can. Remember that this is an opportunity to clean the mind, to calm it down, then to concentrate it, and then to uplift it by development. So take a temperature of what the mind's like right now. And then at the end of the session, just see if there's any change, any difference in the quality of the mind. And as we always say, use your own examples. So I'll be giving some examples as usual, but it's always good to be able to take one's own example from daily life and apply it to the insight pathway, or in terms of being able to do this meditation, to pick the meditation that you're best at in terms of the meditation object. And as we say every week, have good wishes for anyone that has helped us along the path, everyone who's on this session today, and have gratitude for that. So let's start with this slide where we look at Noble Eightfold Path, and I put up here the first profitable direction, or this is what we're recapping today. And it's important to realize that it's rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So I covered this last week in relation to Karaṇīyametta Sutta. But what we find right from the start of any of these meditations is Buddha is correcting our view. And he does that throughout these insight pathways to reinforce the right view, because it's very easy for us to veer off because we've spent our time in samsara and this particular lifetime cultivating the wrong pathway. And so if we cultivate the wrong pathway, then the result is going to be same and same again, subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, the whole mess of suffering. So it does take effort. Like once we establish right view, it takes effort and mindfulness not to neglect that effort based on this right view. And when we have the right view, then what mirrors that is becomes right thought. So we see this very clearly in today's meditation. Right speech will follow, right action, right livelihood. And at the end of the day, after having applied the right effort and mindfulness, we get to the right concentration. And what we'll see as we develop into the next few sessions is that we develop right knowledge and then right liberation. So we develop right knowledge when we get to the right concentration. Our insights, they mirror what the Buddha has said about these meditations, and also we reach the result that Buddha is expecting from that. So in the case of immeasurable loving kindness. But once we get that knowledge, then the next phase is really right liberation. So when we talk about Metta Ceto Vimukti in future sessions, then this is a consequence of having developed the Noble Eightfold Path plus two more things, right knowledge, right liberation. So this is what will happen. So it's very important to see these pathways. They're very important because they take us out of the greed, hatred, and delusion path, what we have been habitually traversing along this whole time. And so it does take great effort, and it also means that it's very important to have suvacha qualities, like willing to bend, willing to try, like the Buddha's instructions. So before we launch into the actual first way to Nibbana or first profitable direction, I thought we'd look at the first unprofitable direction because this is really what we keep traveling down. And we, in fact, if you look at this, we travel down these unprofitable directions every day, and these are our habitual tendencies. So the first doorway to Nibbana is the medicine for this first unprofitable direction. So we start with the physical nutriment. Sometimes that's translated as edible food, gross or subtle. And it's really based on form. So when you think about these bodies, food, that's what falls into the physical nutriment, anything that is based on gross or subtle form. And so when we see these things, our habitual tendency, what we do out of delusion, ignorance and delusion, is that we have this perversion that there is attractive in the unattractive, or subha instead of asubha. And that can also be translated as fair instead of foul, beauty instead of the repulsive. So that's our natural inclination. We don't see things correctly, as the Buddha would say. We don't see the true nature of the physical nutriment. So when that happens, we cling to sensual desires. So we go towards it, and it's quite a strong thing. And this pathway is very much an escalation of our ties to sensual desires. So if you think about craving, craving happens once we start having this perversion and thinking, oh, yes, I take delight in it, I welcome, I remain holding. And so we cling. When we cling, it becomes stronger, it becomes like a bond to it. So there's an escalation there. And once that escalates, then we're tied to it. And so there's coveting. And when there's coveting there, that's an even stronger thing. And then it becomes this taint of sensual desire. Now, we've said before that the post perception of this taint is that we take it as pleasure. So this is a misapprehension for us when you think about Buddha keeps telling us it's actually not pleasure, like the bigger picture of it, that it's tied to suffering. But we don't see that when we run this program. So when the taint of sensual desire happens, then after that it becomes the flood of sensual desire. So you can imagine when you're in the flood, it's like there's no going back. You're caught up in the current. And so you've taken it as attractive or beauty or pleasing or fair, and there's no turning back. It's like you have no choice. So at that point, we start to have this dart of lust. Sometimes that's translated as burning with lust. And from that, consciousness steadies on form. So we keep, even in our mind, we'll keep going back to that object, whether it's food or a person. And so that ends up us going the wrong way through desire. So desire for the physical nutriment. So it's no choice. So that's something to keep in mind as we think about this painful practice with slow realization, that it's the antidote to this. So we come to the painful practice with slow realization. So as the Buddha says, we start with contemplating one of five things. So if one wants to be very skilled at this meditation, then what we do is we do all five. But in the sense of being able to do the meditation, you only need to contemplate one thing. So we said before, and there's the Profitable Perception series, there's perception of unattractiveness, perception of death, perception of repulsiveness of food, perception of non-delight in the entire world, perception of impermanence. So my recommendation is always to pick your best meditation, because if it's your best meditation, then you're somewhat skilled at that. Like you know how to contemplate. So, for example, perception of unattractiveness, we're referring to the body here. So here, one could contemplate the 32 body parts as foul, unattractive, unclean. There's also suttas where Ganda Sutta, where we contemplate the body like a boil. So you contemplate what's coming out of the 9 holes in the body, the impurities that are oozing. And then there's the perception of death. So this is for someone who is well established on the perception of death. So that could be contemplating the 9 stages of charnel ground or dead bodies, and seeing that we're of the same nature. So it's really going against beauty or attractiveness or something pleasing. We're seeing the true nature of the body. The third one is perception of repulsiveness of food. So we've said before, it's like if you were to contemplate a plate of food that's been left out for a day or 3 days or a week, or it could be a contemplation of undigested food and also food waste, and seeing uh, that it's not appealing, it's not pleasing. In fact, there's a lot of repulsiveness that arises if one were to look at it, smell it, taste it, hear about it, touch it. And so the mind has to reject it if the 5 senses are also rejecting it. And then we have the perception of non-delight in the world. So we were looking at suttas like Girimananda Sutta, where there are certain words that are to be contemplated, like to refrain from engagement, clinging to mental standpoints. So the adhitthana, the adherences of inivesa, the underlying tendencies, anusaya, in regard to the world. So that's one form of that meditation. And then the perception of impermanence in all conditions. Well, there are the similes that are given in the Penapindupama Sutta that one can contemplate. So the water bubble is for feeling, the lump of foam is for form, the mirage is for perception, banana tree is tree trunk is volitional formations, the magic trick is um, consciousness. And so it's looking at these aggregates as empty, hollow, void in nature, but specifically the form, to actually see that as the lump of foam, these things are actually, it's nothing there, it's void in nature. So the main objective is actually to correct the distorted view, the wrong perception, and to see it as Asubha rather than Subha in these different cases. And if we're successful, then what happens is we enter into the first mental absorption, so the first jhana. Now, one thing I would say is that what I found is some people, when they do the first contemplation, so painful practice with slow realization. So I'll give you an example. So one of the examples is undigested food. And say, for example, we talk about it as if we regurgitate it. So we regurgitate it as in vomit. So it's very unpleasant, but that's why it's a painful practice, is we have to contemplate things that are not pleasant. So say, for example, you think about, okay, would I like to look at vomit? Like say it's just in front of you. Like one person took their own vomit. And so they said, oh, yeah, I don't like it, and that sort of thing. And they couldn't really, they didn't feel like they reached the first jhana, like by just contemplating very loosely. And one of the things to bear in mind is that sometimes when we pick our meditation object, we don't realize that we kind of don't pick it correctly. So in this person's case, they were picking themselves in terms of the undigested food, and they were saying, okay, look at it, smell it, taste it, hear it, touch it. And they mildly rejected it. So that was the outcome. But the mind still kind of said to itself, I know this, it's okay. But they didn't reach the first jhana. So my advice in that situation was pick a scenario, the same kind of scenario, but not yourself, because maybe there's me and mine there, so you're okay with your own undigested food. Don't pick, for example, your children, because as a parent, you might be okay as well, because that's me and mine. My child, you might be mildly okay with their undigested food. Likewise, if it's one's parents and you have a fondness for parents as they get old, that it's still okay. So I was suggesting pick someone like a stranger on the bus and they vomit and their undigested food comes out. So would you like to look at it? Well, the answer is strongly no. And would you like to smell it? And again, totally repulsed. Would you like to taste it? Definitely not. Would you like to hear it as they're vomiting? Of course not. And then would you like to touch it and clean it up? Of course not. So when those five are strongly rejected, and you see it as this is really unclean, it's impure, it's not pleasing, then the mind really cannot accept it. It rejects it as well. So, in that way, if you strongly contemplate it, you enter into the first jhana. So, that is some of the impediments that come up. Likewise, when it comes to this body, contemplating the 32 body parts or contemplating it as a bag of impurities, sometimes we have a way because we may know Dhamma, like we've listened to a lot of Dhamma, or actually the truth of it is we don't want to contemplate these things and we don't enter into the first jhana and we think, okay, that's fine. But the point is, if we are diligent in how we apply the example and do the contemplation, the first jhana just appears. So it's as simple as that. So that's the encouragement. So once you reach the first jhana, then we come to the first establishment of mindfulness. Just bear with me 1 second, excuse me. Okay, so the first establishment of mindfulness. So this is very important. I like to think of this third step as laying the foundation even stronger. So one has done a difficult contemplation, entered into the first jhana, you can stay there. So even when you go through the first step, you do the contemplation, it's good to pause. Like pause to actually see whether you've contemplated well. And once you see that, you can keep contemplating. So this is the vitaka vichara, the wholesome kind of vitaka vichara. And then you make sure you enter into the first jhana. Now, once you're in the first jhana, this third step is very much solidifying a wisdom part of the teaching. So we've corrected our perception, and now we're on the profitable path. So we have the right view, part of the right view. So this first establishment of mindfulness is really about kayanupassana, so mindfulness of the body. And it's not just any kind of contemplation of the body, it's very specific. So here we're really looking at the samudaya tangama, so the arising and the passing away. So we see the arising and then we see the passing away, and then we see the arising and passing away. So it's very clear that we're trying to establish that we're not going to take it the wrong way. Now, when we do this, what we said before is we look at the Samadhi Bhavana Sutta, because this is the sutta that you can see it very clearly. So say, for example, I take the same example that we used before, undigested food. So when we see food normally, what normally happens is we think about our favorite food. It can be sushi, it can be pizza, it can be some kind of exotic food, or it can be our favorite food from what our mother cooked us or our father cooked us when we were young, or the treat that they took us to when we were young. So what happens is we would say, we seek delight, we go, oh, yeah, that food is good. I'm happy with that food. We welcome it or express it, and we say, oh, yes, this is fantastic. I've got to have that again from that particular place. And then we remain holding. When can I have it again? Maybe I'll have it next week. Maybe I'll order it, tomorrow as well. And so what happens is there's delight. And we know this pathway. So it's like if there's delight, then there's clinging. If there's clinging, then there's existence, bhava. So we're happy to put some money into the money box for that experience again with that food. And if that's the case at the end of the birth, this is the bigger picture. Remember, these meditations are the supramundane Arya path. Then we're saying we're happy to be born and happy to birth a body and to have these experiences again with the food that we've misapprehended. So what do we expect from that? Aging and death and the whole mass of suffering. So in the meditation, one would pause because one realizes due to this misapprehension, all I'm getting is the arising of suffering through this misapprehension about food. And so then one recalls, okay, well, I contemplated the repulsiveness of food and I've seen that it's repulsive, but I've misapprehended, but I still get, if I run this program, this arising, it's arising of suffering. So then we look at the passing away. So for that favorite food, we say we don't seek delight, we don't welcome, we don't remain holding. If that's the case, then there's a cessation of delight. If there's a cessation of delight, we're not giving value to it, then there's a cessation of clinging. If there's a cessation of clinging, then there's the cessation of existence. So we're not putting money into that money box for that experience because we haven't assigned any value to it. We've seen it clearly. If that's the case, then there's the cessation of birth. If there's a cessation of birth, there's the cessation of aging and death and the cessation of the whole mass of suffering. So you can see if you do this meditation correctly, what we're overcoming is any kind of perversion that there's something attractive or pleasing or tasty there in regards to food. So that's a very, very powerful thing because this is really the cessation of suffering. This is the arising of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. So you can see if that insight is very powerful and one doesn't rush through these steps, one can actually do the arising and passing away together at that point, having seen it one way, another way, then it becomes very strong. Like some people that have done one-to-one sessions with me, it becomes immediately that they say to me, isn't this just the arising and passing away of suffering? And the answer is yes. It's because you see it clearly. The other question that we often ask when we do the Samadhi Bhavana is, how did I construct this body? And it's because we misapprehended. And all we did was we chose wrong again. So when we do these meditations, if you think about it this way as an encouragement or inspiration, every day without this teaching, we train ourselves to choose wrongly. We just completely choose the wrong path each and every day in our mind. It's not the fact that we're eating the food or dealing with these bodies, it's what happens in the mind. And so it's only when we do these meditations that we get the chance to choose differently, to train our minds differently to see the truth. So this is really seeing the true nature. So in this case, the true nature, as the example, is food. But one could, if your meditation object from the beginning is the loathsomeness of the body, then even here, you would put one's own body in or somebody else's body in here and actually see it's still the arising and passing away of suffering. And it's actually something that is misapprehended as subha, as attractive, pleasing. But really, if you see the body as a bag of impurities, or if you see the 32 body parts, that's really the true nature of the body. And this is just solidifying the arising and passing away nature of the body. So if that meditation is done very well, then one reaches the first abiding. So the first abiding is what we call Dibba Vihara, or heavenly abiding, sometimes also called celestial abiding. So it's the first four jhanas. So essentially, we were in the first jhana, but it's very mild in the sense of one's wisdom faculty. When we do the first establishment of mindfulness, the Kayanupassana, then the wisdom that one has insight into is stronger. So one reaches this first abiding very strongly. Now people ask, does that mean we reach which jhana is it? Because Dibba is four jhanas. So one, first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. It differs from person to person. So some people immediately go to the second jhana, where the rapture is very strong. It's very evident in the body. It's just strongly flowing. So they've moved from first jhana to second jhana. For other people, it's they've gone past that and they're actually into mental happiness. So they're in the third jhana. But for some people who have a lot of skill, then immediately sometimes people can go straight to the fourth jhana. And that's more of that imperturbable state where there's more equanimity and they've let go of pain and pleasure. So for each person will differ, but if this third step is done very well, then it's very apparent that one reaches a state where it's out of sensual pleasures, out of sensual desires, out of temporarily out of um, unwholesome things, unskillful states. So this is what we call the first taste of Nibbana. So it's a very strong kind of thing when you actually reach that. So then what happens is when you get that first taste of Nibbana at Dibba Vihara, what happens is you want to protect that because it's very easy in our meditations to veer off. So sometimes in any meditation, a thought may come from work, from family members, from family disputes, from things we saw at the shop, all kinds of things. So this first right striving is like our first right effort. So it says here, Bhikkhu generates desire for the non-arising of unarisen bad unwholesome states. He makes an effort, arouses energy, applies his mind and strives. So this is very, very clear. We have developed to a high degree up until Dibba, so one of the first four jhanas. And at that point, you don't want to lose, you don't want to come down from that state because it's that worm in a dung heap. You we thought before that sensual pleasures is great, and then we experience these jhanas and realize actually there's something where we don't even have to have dealings with sensual pleasures. We can experience happiness, equanimity, all kinds of things without having to deal with sensual pleasures. And so at that point, you want to protect it. So the first right striving is saying, I'm not going to allow sensual thoughts to re-enter the mind. I'm not going to allow ill will thoughts to re-enter the mind. I'm not going to allow cruelty or harmful thoughts to re-enter the mind. And that takes some effort. So at that state, nothing is there, but we just in our mind almost like check it and say, I'm not going to allow it. It's like that right thought is kicking in from right view. And then when we come to the next part, this part is actually very important because the first wonderful and marvelous idea is the first noble truth of suffering. Now, if you remember, we said at the beginning that there's the taint of sensual desire. This is the antidote for it because the post-perception of the taint of sensual desire is pleasure, is happiness, sukha. So if we think that food, these bodies, material things, whatever is the physical nutriment brings pleasure, then we're misapprehending. And so the antidote for this is to strongly contemplate the First Noble Truth of suffering. And so Buddha asks us to contemplate birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, and despair are suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not getting what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. Excuse me one moment. Okay, please excuse my allergies today. Um, now, this first wonderful and marvelous idea, this contemplation of the noble truth of suffering, is that, as I was saying, we have been taking delight in all these things. That's what we've been conditioned with in this lifetime and in previous lifetimes. So our general nature is pleasure seeking. So if there's boredom, we go look for pleasure in sensual things. We go to the fridge, we turn on the TV, we go looking for a person, we go looking for sensual experiences. And Buddha really wants us to see in this Arya sense, in this supramundane sense, that what we are dealing with in samsara is a bad deal. It's a dire predicament. So when we contemplate birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, there's something very magical about it. Like people often ask, why does Buddha ask us to contemplate so much suffering? It's because when we contemplate it correctly, the mind releases from this tightness. It literally happens because we're giving the mind the truth. So when we contemplate birth is suffering, it's understanding that when we birth this body, the minute that we are in the mother's womb, it's not a fun experience because the womb is right next to the the urinary sac and also where the unpleasant things are. And so it's not pleasant to be there for so long. It's like being in a smelly toilet. Likewise, when we're born, it's not necessarily a happy experience. Babies come out of the womb when they're born screaming and crying and in great distress, and they come out looking extremely unclean. And then they're washed off and everything. And when you contemplate even birth is suffering, we need to contemplate all the various things. We can't speak. We're totally dependent on somebody else to take care of us. When we're hungry, when we're grumpy, when we have soiled ourselves, the whole shebang. And as we grow up, there's more and more things that are imposed on us. So school, then having to work, then having to pay bills, then having to be taxed, the whole gamut of it. So when we think about our jobs, our bills, having to deal with certain things in different countries, the weather, illness, aging, the whole gamut, then we understand what suffering really is. And so part of it is being able to see the whole span of suffering and to know even though certain things happen, we keep trying to fix it, but we can't escape this suffering. So at the end of the day, when someone in our family dies, we are united with what is displeasing, we're separated from what is pleasing, and we never get what we want. So there's something very sublime in contemplating it correctly. And of course, when we contemplate birth is suffering, one can contemplate birth in all realms of existence as well to see that. And so this is something that if one contemplates this and gives it time and really looks at these different facets of suffering, then the mind gets very peaceful just from that alone. Like people who are unfamiliar with the contemplation of the First Noble Truth of suffering don't realize that when we crave for pleasure, it's actually the cause of all this suffering. Like we saw it even in the mindfulness of the body contemplation. When we take delight, welcome, remain holding, that's the craving portion of it. But we've misapprehended what we're taking delight in. And we really see that in this meditation. So this adds this layer to it. And also the other thing we know from this is that there are three kinds of suffering, another category that Buddha gives, which is no matter what object we take, no matter what contact we make, no matter what kind of feeling arises, all we get is the three kinds of suffering. So with the agreeable object, we get the painfulness in change. With the disagreeable object, we get the painfulness in pain. And with the neither disagreeable or agreeable object, we get the painfulness in construction. So that's also another way of looking at it. So when we get this contemplation right, then, and we're like seeing this very clearly for the first time or again and again through this pathway, then we come to the first determination. Because what we see is we've been deceived. Like what is in the world with these sensual pleasures, these bodies, this food, it's deceiving us. Buddha talks about in terms of sensual pleasures in the Unprofitable Sutta, they're impermanent, they're hollow, they're false, they're deceptive, they're illusory. It takes us some time to really see it. But the more and more we do these meditations and contemplations, we start to see it clearly. So what we're seeing in this meditation is the same thing. Whether the example you take is of this body or one of a loved one, or you take food, what we realize is having understood the arising and passing away of suffering, understood the bigger predicament of suffering that all of us are party to, we're not alone in this, it's not personal suffering, it's collective suffering, then Buddha says, for what is false, bhikkhu, which has a deceptive nature, and what is true, which has an undeceptive nature, that is Nibbana. So this first determination is really having seen suffering clearly. We determine for the truth. And so the most supreme truth is really Nibbana. So we make the determination for truth, and that determination is for Nibbana. So when we strongly, having seen this in our pathway, so it's not something that we just theoretically are doing, we've contemplated through our example and our meditation object and then followed the instructions, what we reach is the concentration due to desire because it's the desire for Nibbana. So the concentration due to desire means that we're no longer saying, I want sensual pleasures, I want food, I want these bodies, because we've seen through it. We've seen the loathsomeness of food, the repulsive nature of the body, and whatever examples we've taken. So we come to this concentration, which is much stronger at this stage because it has more wisdom added through this insight pathway. Now, the enemies of this concentration are covetousness and sadness. So that makes sense, right? If we fall from this meditation or fall from this concentration, it's because we're falling for the physical nutriment again. So just imagine in the meditation sometimes maybe the mind plays tricks and it says, "Oh, I wonder what's been cooked for dinner," or "I wonder what so and so is doing." It's trying to pull us out of this concentration. And in the early days of doing the meditation, this can happen quite a lot. So some kind of proliferation enters the mind. But what one has to do is to actually restrain the sense faculties. So this is like the Indriya Sangbara component, or in the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, it's the Santindriyo portion, so controlled in the sense faculties. Because what this is saying, and this is a Sukhabhagya Dhamma, something associated with happiness for the meditator, is that we know that it's very important to guard the sense faculties. So in the mind or in the meditation, it's very much the mind because the mind has collected all these things through these other sense faculties. So if we've been to a concert, we've collected the sounds. If we've been to a movie, we've collected the forms, those sorts of things. So they've been collected. But in the meditation, at the mind level, we're saying, no, no, thank you. I've reached this concentration due to desire, and I'm skilled, so I'm not a foolish person. Like if we go, we know that this restraint in the sense faculties, it connects to controlled in the sense faculties, and then we finish off the meditation of the Karaṇīyametta Sutta. So like the Buddha says, a prudent person, a wise person controls the sense faculties. So that makes sense in this meditation, because if we don't guard the sense faculties, what do? We go back to the physical nutriment, to form. Restraining the sense faculties, if you put the unprofitable direction and the profitable direction together, these two pathways, this really overcomes consciousness steadying on form, steadying on the physical nutriment. So this is very important to preserve our concentration due to desire. So, like we do in Karaṇīyametta Sutta, if we control the sense faculties, then we're wise. And so we follow the rest of the meditation, that we don't raise ourselves with mental impoliteness, because we're not thinking that any particular family is having permanent happiness, like kings or royalty or famous people or whoever we have assumed is having permanent happiness. We don't raise ourselves to that level. And in that way, we're not yearning to associate with any families, including the one that we're currently in, or any other families that we would, or groups that we would like to associate with. Like we said, right view is not me and mine. So, having seen the true nature of these bodies, the food, we're not yearning to associate with any families. And so, in that way, there is no blocks or obstructions to loving kindness. If that's the case, then we can wish in gladness and safety, may all beings be happy. And we understand that we're all in the same boat. So, we can spread that loving kindness to the different groups of beings, and then we come to anger and ill will. And again, we check, are there any blocks to that? Are we still holding grudges? If so, these groups that we have looked at in terms of weak or strong, long or large, middle sized, all these different groups, that's like the sample of death, the spectrum of death that happens in these realms of existence. And so, what is there to be angry about? And if we still hold on to any ill will, then we realize this is bad for that person, this is bad for us, this is bad for both of us, this would destroy our wisdom. So it's very similar to the contemplation that the Bodhisattva did in the Vedavitaka Sutta um, before enlightenment. And so we follow the same kind of method. And so we don't wish anyone to suffer. Knowing the arising and passing away of suffering, we don't wish anyone to suffer in this long samsara. And so we come to, one can contemplate the simile of the mother to a child, having perfected these skilled states. But we know we've only got a number of skilled states here, that we're only virtuous to a certain degree. And that really is what we're missing, is that we haven't removed the greed, the covetousness for sensual pleasures. And so that last step is really saying, no, thank you. I realize the arising and passing away of suffering. I'm not going to be duped by this physical nutriment, whether it's food, these bodies. All those things are subject to aging. If it's born, it's subject to aging, sickness, and death. So why am I searching for something that is subject to aging, sickness, and death? That's bad for me. All I will get is suffering. And so you come to the end that we choose, we definitely don't want to be born to a mother's womb. And so we wish from the 10 skilled states, may all beings in gladness and safety be happy, be free from suffering. So that's the meditation. So again, just to recap before we do a meditation, pick your best meditation to correct the perception. If you do that correctly, one enters into the first jhana. From the first jhana, we contemplate the arising and passing away of the physical nutriment, this body, or the example could also be food. Then we enter into the first abiding, having seen that very clearly, that that is the arising and passing away of suffering. That's not a good deal for us. So then we get that first taste of Nibbana, and then we guard the mind. So the mind is lifted. We guard it. So we say, I'm not going to let any sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, harming thoughts come to the mind. So it hasn't arisen, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to generate desire to prevent it. And then after that, we contemplate the first noble truth of suffering at length. So we confirm that this is a bad predicament, that all we get is suffering if we keep going for these wrong things. And so with that insight, we make the determination, having seen that what is in the world, these bodies, this food, things based on the physical nutriment, gross or subtle, is really something that is false and deceptive, that it's empty, it's illusory. So we make the determination for something that's not deceptive. So that means Buddha has said the supreme truth is really Nibbana. So we make the determination for Nibbana. With that very strong determination, we enter into the concentration due to desire. And so to protect that, we restrain our sense faculties. And so we follow the rest of Karaṇīyametta Sutta in order to develop the immeasurable loving kindness. So we go through Santindriyocha Nipakocha. So having controlled the sense faculties, we're wise. We don't have any mental impoliteness, we remove it. We are not taking anything as me and mine, so we're not going to be attached to any families or groups. We can start wishing from that point, and then we remove the anger or ill will, reflecting that this is the spectrum of death. What is there to be angry about? We don't want to destroy our wisdom. So we reflect on our virtue, and we have not given up covetousness. So we need to realize none of these sensual pleasures based on the physical nutriment are for us, and therefore we give it up. We give it up because we've seen through it through this meditation. And then we wish loving kindness to all living beings with that knowledge. And it's very, very powerful at that point. So let's do a short meditation. Let's do 10 minutes. And then we'll do some questions and I'll answer them. Okay. Teruan Saranai. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Blessings of the Triple Gem, Teruan Saranai, we can come out of our meditation. Now, of course, we need usually longer to meditate on these things. So I encourage you to practice, 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 practice. And usually with the immeasurable loving kindness, it's really good to keep repeating and repeating and repeating, to keep cultivating and developing it. It's very, very helpful. So let's look at some questions on this meditation. There was a broader question about why is it easier to meditate on the four nutriments, for example, the physical nutriment and going the wrong way with desire, than the four profitable directions, for example, painful practice with slow realization? This is a somewhat interesting question. It wasn't a question I really expected because people don't normally ask this kind of question, but there's a truth to that question because what they're asking is why is it easier to meditate on these unprofitable ones? And the simple answer is because this is what we do on an ongoing basis. So what Buddha says is that all beings are sustained by nutriment. So that means we're sustained by the physical nutriment, contact as nutriment, mental volition as nutriment, consciousness as nutriment. And consciousness keeps steadying on form, feeling, perception, volitional formations. So each and every day, if you really think about it, we're going down these pathways over and over again. So if you think about these perversions as an example, we're always having this either perception, thought, or view that the form, this physical nutriment, there's something that is attractive or pleasing. We hardly ever see something as unattractive in the dharmic way. Likewise, we're always chasing the pleasure, thinking that the pleasure is valuable, not seeing that this greater predicament is bound to suffering. Likewise, we keep developing me and mine. So there was the last profitable perception we looked at in terms of suffering in what is not self, something like that. So basically, what we keep developing is based on form, feeling, and perception. So these are the things that we keep developing as me and mine. And of course, we take these conditions as permanent. So we think that there is a permanent self, that what we experience as pleasure can be sustained, that we can fix it if it diminishes. But what we see in this is it keeps breaking. So if you think about it in very simplistic terms, each and every day we're developing the greed path. So we're pressing the greed button. And then with this particular, every time we contact something, when we go down the hate path, we keep pressing the hate button. So think about turning on the news, or when we have a dispute with someone, or when we look in the mirror and we see aging, it's like we keep going down and pressing this button. Likewise, when we've taken something as me and mine, we're very protective. We don't wish for it to fail or to be damaged or any kind of thing to be affected. We go down the fear path. So we're pressing the fear button. And of course, the delusion button is in everything, that we think that we're in control of all these conditions as permanent. So that's why it's easier, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to meditate on these particular things, because when you put your examples into any of these directions, it's so apparent um, to actually see. It's like, oh, I can diagnose myself, like which way, wrong way I'm going down. And so in this particular person's case, clearly with their question, they enjoyed doing these meditations because they could self-diagnose work situations, family situations, uh, things that they were clinging on to. And in that way, they found this one easier. Now, when it comes to the unprofitable directions, like I was saying, we keep developing it because it's rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's the wrong Eightfold Path. So when we have wrong perceptions, the wrong view, then of course we're not going to have thoughts of renunciation. We're going to have sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, harmful thoughts, which is the state of the world. If you look at the way the TV portrays things on the internet, even when we talk to each other, if we're not with right view, then what's happening is sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, and harmful thoughts. And of course, the wrong kinds of speech come out. So we are dividing, we have harsh speech, we're lying, and we gossip and have frivolous kind of speech, and then wrong actions come from that. So we're happy to kill, we're happy to steal, we're happy to have sexual misconduct or even misconduct with the senses, and we have wrong livelihood. So therefore we think we're making the right effort, but we're actually making the wrong effort, and we're quite neglectful. Even though there might be some kind of wrong mindfulness, but we're neglectful of the right path, and so we get the wrong concentration. So that's what really is being developed. And I think when you start to see that, you start to realize how important it is, even a little bit of time towards correcting our view and doing the right meditations, how important it is. Because we work on the assumption that we've got a long life ahead of us, no matter what age. So if you're in your teens or in your early 20s, then you assume, oh, I'll live until I'm 70 or 80, maybe more. Even in 40s or 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, oh, I've still got plenty of time. Or even 60s, 70s, 80s, one would think, oh, but there's still 100. Maybe we've got relatives who live to 100. And so we always think we have plenty of time. But when you realize that we have no control over when we eventually pass away from whatever conditions affect us, if we haven't trained in the right path, then what we've been training is this wrong path, rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, misapprehending food, misapprehending the body. So at the end of our life, we have no choice but to choose wrong again. And so that's why these insight pathways given by the Buddha are so precious, because each and every step is saying you don't need to do, you don't need to follow this wrong path anymore. Train the mind to choose differently at the point of death, or to be skilled enough to not choose in those wrong directions. Now, why the profitable directions are harder is because we're not used to these pathways. We're not used to this medicine. And when I talk to people, and myself included before, when I didn't know how to do these meditations, I was kicking and screaming, saying, I don't want to do these meditations, particularly painful practice. It's like, I don't want to do these meditations. They're awful. Why would I want to contemplate the body that way? Why would I want to contemplate my favorite foods that way? No, thank you. But we don't realize how important it is, particularly when you build up these inside pathways. And so the difficulty that comes is, one, knowing why we're doing these steps, which is why we explain these things, and to show what they're the antidote for. And two, it's because there is something in Buddha's instructions that develops the mind so powerfully and makes it think correctly. So that's part of the kusala path, the skilled path. And so if you develop these things over time, what you notice is there is movement, there is development, there is skill, there is the falling away of things which are unwholesome, there is noble washing, and there is clear insight, and also ability to attain to certain mind states. So immeasurable loving kindness, or where we will eventually go is the liberation of mind by loving kindness, and that is very, very powerful. So in that sense, it's difficult because of the learning. But once the learning happens, so in theory, then you practice it, and then you have all these questions that come up like, oh, why this, why that, and some of these we'll tackle today. Then it starts to get really interesting. And then when you get one's own insight that mirrors what the Buddha is saying, it's like entire aha moments. It's like, oh, oh. And one of the most beautiful things about this meditation, if we just talk about first profitable direction, painful practice with slow realization, when someone says, oh, now I understand why contemplating suffering is so important, or now I understand, now I see that contemplating the noble truth of suffering makes the mind happy. How can that be? But it's true. And I think that's really marvelous. So if you get to that point and that's what you see in this meditation, well done you, because then that question about why does the Buddha keep asking us to contemplate suffering so much, it just falls into place with a meditation like this. So of course, with the other pathways, yes, there is difficulty because one needs to understand, quite a lot of stuff. And if you look at this, this has all the requisites of enlightenment within these meditations. So that means it's heading towards Nibbana. So just as an example, we have the four establishments of mindfulness, we have the four right striving, we have the Four Noble Truths. Within this, the Noble Eightfold Path is there. We have the four concentrations, which is linked to the Iddhipadas, and it appears twice. We have, things like that. It's all included. And of course, we use our spiritual powers or spiritual faculties and powers to actually sharpen all these things. So it's actually quite wonderful when you know how all these things work. So when it comes to, yes, there's difficulty in this, but we apply effort, and the more effort you apply, the more diligence, then over time with practice, one becomes skilled. And so that's the encouragement, really. So of course, with that, we develop the Noble Eightfold Path. So with the Noble Eightfold Path, what really happens is all those requisites of enlightenment get developed at the same time. So it's rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So it's outside of our daily life. In daily life, society, people who are not in Dhamma, even people who are in Dhamma, we get pulled into those old tendencies, the conditioning that is not helpful. But in our meditation, when Buddha says take kaya viveka, so physical seclusion, then you can have chitta viveka, the mental seclusion. Eventually, you have upadhi. Um, then what happens is you're able to remove those things that are holding us to nibbana, to samsara. So there's something in Buddha saying that with the physical seclusion, we make time after we've done our responsibilities, done all our things, then we can develop these things that help us. And so we get chitta viveka, the mental seclusion from that. Okay, next question. I've been struggling with illness for some time, and though I have felt some ease in cultivating metta in the past, I'm finding it difficult now. Do you have any advice? I think when it comes to the first profitable direction or the first doorway to Nibbana, it's a very important meditation, even through the lens of illness. So when you think about this body, because illness, when we're afflicted with illness, we're actually rejecting the body which is failing us. So usually we think this body is great, even though we may not consciously think about it. But when we look in the mirror, we beautify it, we clean it, we try not to see anything yucky. But when we're sick, it becomes more apparent. So say, for example, if one has some kind of leg issue and suddenly the leg swells, maybe there's pus, maybe there is some sort of thing that happens with the body that is quite repulsive. But the thing is, when we're ill, if the Dhamma, the right view is not there, immediately we would think, oh, yuck, horrible, but not in the way that Buddha recommends. It's in that way of rejection. Like, I don't want that. My body's meant to be uh, up to scratch. It's meant to be healthy. It's meant to not fail me like this. I'm not meant to see the inside of my body coming out, say if there's pus or if there's blood or some accident happens through illness. But if you contemplate it through the first profitable direction, then there's insight and there's relief because you're really seeing the true nature of the body. Whereas when we're ill and we don't have the right view, what we're trying to do is see it through the lens of the unprofitable direction, like it shouldn't be doing these things. I don't want to see that because my body is part of the sensual desire and it's meant to make me happy. The taint of sensual desire is that I get pleasure from this body. I can take it to the shops, I can take it to the movies, I can take it to see my friends. I can, when it's performing well, I can hug people, I can run, I can walk, all kinds of things. But when it's sick, the body is saying it can't do that. And part of when we see even the yuckiness of the body, say if we have the flu or bronchitis, there's lots of phlegm, there's lots of maybe even blood coming out when we cough, all kinds of different things. We may not be seeing it correctly, and so it's very difficult for metta to be there because what's actually happening is we go from the wrong way with desire. So we want the body to not be the way that it actually is, its true nature. We don't like that. And so every time we have to contact the body, like even think about it in our mind when we're sick, we're saying, I demand the pleasure, but in actual fact, all I'm getting is the pain. And clinging to virtue and observances is, well, my body should not be like this. My body should be healthy. My body should be operating correctly. My body should be healing quickly. And so there's a lot of ill will that starts, and so we're actually flooded with this dart of hate, because I demand the pleasure from my sick body. It's not healing quick enough, or it's dire, but all I'm experiencing is pain. And so at the level of consciousness, it's steady on feeling, and then it's going the wrong way with hate. And so when it comes to mental volition as nutriment, like what's kicking in here? Me and my body should not be this way. Me and my body is the only one going through this illness. And so there's all these views that are misapprehended, because there's no right view there. If it's me and my body, I'm the only one going through this particular illness. All my friends are able to go for, a lunch, or out for an outing, or to meet up with people, or go for a Dhamma event or something like that. And so the perceptions are sick at this point, and consciousness is steadying there. And so, we go the wrong way with fear. But on the same note, consciousness is nutriment. When the body is sick, it's challenging this permanency. So most of the time we think I'm in control, I can fix it. And even with illness, we often think we can fix it. But what happens is it's not true. The body will heal when it will heal, or sometimes it needs a lot of help to do that. And so when it's challenged, what's kicking in there is, the impermanency of even good health. It's being challenged. And so this theory of me and mine is like, well, I'm meant to be able to fix this, and it's my body. I'm supposed to be able to do these things. I have all these plans. And so this ignorance and delusion is kicking in. So we're going the wrong way with delusion, just in summary. But what you can see here is when we're ill and we have a lot of shoulds and should nots at the level of clinging to virtue and observances. My body should be like this, it shouldn't be like that. It should be healing really quickly, but it's not. And I'm demanding pleasure, but all I'm getting is pain. Then this is very much down the hate path. And so there's no metta there. Like, I think the first thing when one is ill is to admit that as much as one has developed metta in the past, when there's illness, whether it's severe or even mild, then it's good to just admit that, because then you have a starting point, which is, I need to develop one of these pathways. So when it comes to, like, say, the painful practice with slow realization, you would take one's own body and contemplate it. So say, for example, you take the body in terms of the sack of impurities. So it's quite often easy to see, like when you're sick, what's coming out through the holes in the nose, what's coming out through the ears, what's coming out through the mouth, what's coming out through the lower ones, and what's coming out through the eyes. Like when one's sick, a lot of impurities are coming out. And it's good to really contemplate that, because one is seeing the body very clearly, the true nature of the body. And it's not even about the illness itself, it's just about seeing the body very clearly. When one sees the body very clearly, you'd be very surprised how quickly one goes to the first jhana. That's without any aversion. Like, if there's aversion towards illness, drop that and just contemplate the body correctly, even the 32 body parts. Just see it very, very clearly, because we take so much delight in this body, but we're not seeing the true nature of it. So once you enter into the first mental absorption, the first jhana, then you know you can do like the abhinandati abhivadati ajosayatitati. So am I taking delight in this body, the way I beautify it and dress it up and everything? Do I welcome all the, tell people, oh, do I look good? All these sorts of things. And then I remain holding on to it, like the next event when people could look at my body. And so you see that we keep developing it in the wrong way to beautify. But the body itself, the true nature of the body is not like that. And we see that when it's even ill. And so it's very good to do this arising and passing away. There's so much relief from it, especially when you realize all it produces is suffering. And so if I don't take delight, don't welcome, don't remain holding, then I cut off all these things. I see the passing away of suffering. And so one deeply enters into the Dibbha-vihara, the first abiding, the heavenly realm, the heavenly abiding. And so when the mind is strong like that, even with sickness, when the mind is strong like that, you make effort saying, I'm not going to have sensual thoughts. I'm not going to have ill will thoughts. I'm not going to have any harmful thoughts because they're not there right now. I'm going to prevent them from arising. And so then one contemplates this dukkha. And it's good because contemplate birth is suffering, like the whole gamut of this life thing of having to be born, having to study, having to be told off, having to work, having to pay bills, having to have financial difficulty, having to deal with politics, having to deal with country issues, having to deal with all these things. And then you contemplate the aging. And then, aging comes in all different forms with the eyesight, the sense of smell, the sense of taste, all of that. And then being sick, it's so easy to contemplate illness is suffering. But also remember, when we contemplate birth, aging, sickness, and death as suffering, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that's like that. That's very important when we contemplate the First Noble Truth. I'm not the only one. This is the predicament of all of us in samsara. And then when you see what I've been taking, like this body, it's deceiving me. It's deceiving me. So if it's deceiving me, what is not going to deceive me? And so there's a very strong determination for Nibbana. And so one enters into the concentration due to desire and then restraining the sense faculties. Then you finish off the meditation through Karaṇīyametta Sutta. So this meditation can be very helpful because it releases the mind from so much aversion. Like when we age, when we get sick, how angry do we get? Like even just having hay fever or allergies, the immediate response is, oh, I've got to talk through Dhamma, I've got to help people, but my body is not doing so well. And of course, aversion arises, but then you have to overcome that. The only way is to understand these things correctly. Otherwise, the aversion is still there, whether you like it or not. That's for all of us. So with illness, nobody likes to be sick. But when we birth these bodies, we are bonded to sickness. Can't help it. And so there's much relief in being able to contemplate really clearly and carefully. The mind might say, I'm too weak, I don't want to do it. But when you actually do it, this is my experience. When I've been sick and I've actually dedicated to make some effort with the little energy that I have towards it, it's very helpful. The healing happens much quicker because there's less resistance to the illness, there's less sort of aversion to the illness. There's this anger about one's body and about blaming outside things for the illness. Okay, so I hope that one helps. The next question is, what should I do if I forget the steps halfway through the meditation? This is common, particularly in the beginning and even as one is developing the meditation. Just like I said with Karaṇīyametta Sutta, it's important to make effort. So writing things out, all this sort of stuff as the preparation work. Now, when you're in the meditation and halfway through, the recommendation is to, if you forget a few steps, just go to the next step that you remember and keep moving forward. Like do more of the next step. So for example, if for example you are in the first abiding and you can't remember the first right striving, but you remember that you need to contemplate the noble truth of suffering, then don't worry about it. Concentrate on the first noble truth of suffering, even though you missed a step, and contemplate that quite deeply. And if you can remember the rest, keep going. Like at least continue the meditation as best as you can. And if you find that you completely forget, then start from the beginning again. Like have a look at the notes and then start from the beginning again. But don't back down from the meditation. Like sometimes we just give in and give up. And I find that in the early days, I would just keep going. Especially if I was meditating in a group, I would just keep going and I would at least try to get to the loving kindness. So that would be my recommendation. Next question is it okay to develop some of the earlier steps of the meditation, for example, the Asubha part, and not finish with loving kindness? I've said before that it's not good to contemplate just the Asubha part of the meditation. And that's because in the suttas, there are tragic things that have happened in the suttas when you just simply focus on Asubha, like the unattractiveness or the repulsiveness of the body in particular. And that's because at the time of the Buddha, that's what some of the monks were doing, maybe monks and nuns were doing. And so they ended up unaliving themselves and destroying their own lives because that meditation wasn't good done in that way. And so when you have an insight pathway that says you start with this, like a contemplation, say unattractiveness of the body, the Buddha intends for us to end with immeasurable loving kindness. And so we should end with that. Now, what I would say is if you start with this and you only manage to do a little bit, but at least end with loving kindness, even if you join it to Karaṇīyametta and finish with loving kindness, I think that's more healthy and safe. So that's what I would recommend. So that's the extreme. The extreme is like what the suttas have said about the monks. Now, with lay people, what I've witnessed and seen, and even with one monk, is that I think I've witnessed one monk who's gone a bit off with it. And I think with lay people, what happens is if you do too much Asubha Bhavana just on its own, you end up wanting to isolate yourself. You end up wanting to control the meditation conditions. And this is just generalized. So this is not applicable to everyone who does Asubha Bhavana only. But there's something very odd about when we do it, when lay people do it. It can be a little bit unusual, the results. And so the recommendation is always, if you're going to do something that is Asubha Bhavana, to make sure you end with loving kindness. And that's just a safety precaution. It's something that Buddha has instructed, so it's good for us. And likewise with the Profitable Perception series, that one is you're meant to develop a sequence of profitable perceptions. That's what makes it safe. Buddha doesn't say just do one in those particular suttas. He says do seven profitable perceptions, or do 9 profitable perceptions, or in the Girimananda Sutta, do 10 profitable perceptions. So these are the things that the way Buddha would teach. So in answer to the question, always end with loving kindness, even if you can't do the rest of the steps, at least end with loving kindness. And then the last question is, so this was a question where people were asking specific things, and the ones that were very common was, what do I need to do for the first jhana? What do I need to do for the first heavenly abode? What do I need to do for concentration due to desire? So what I would say in answer to that is that those particular ones in particular is not a doing process. It's that the step before has allowed you to reach those particular absorptions. So if you've done, like with these inflection points that I've highlighted before, when you take the meditation object, one of those 5, what it does is it corrects the wrong view. And so using vitakka vichara, like wholesome thought and examination, we're actually skillfully correcting the view. So we're going from wrong view to right view. When that contemplation is successful, one reaches the first jhana. And it has that quality of vitakka vichara, so the thought and examination, it has the rapture, it has the happiness, it has the one-pointedness, so things like that are there. Now, one of the things that someone has said to me is when they've meditated, they're thinking about those things associated with the first jhana. It's good not to do that. It's not good to think about the theory. It's good to actually do the meditation and get the result and not think about, oh, what are the components of the first jhana, because that will take you out of the first jhana. It will take you, maybe you won't even reach the first jhana. So that's not how one would meditate. But just in answer to the first jhana, if you do the first contemplation correctly, you've taken a good meditation object, you've contemplated it correctly, you've corrected the wrong view, you've seen the asubha part, so the unattractive part correctly, or the repulsiveness part of food correctly, then you reach the first jhana. And then when it comes to the first abiding, that is also like if one contemplates the kayanupassana, the mindfulness of the body correctly, so they're rising and passing away, seeing the true nature, then what happens is one would reach Dibbha Vihara strongly. So that means from first jhana you'd go into another one of the jhanas, like more strongly. And like the inflection point here is with the Kayanupassana, you're really seeing the rising and passing away of suffering. You're really seeing the unlasting nature of this physical nutriment form. We're also seeing it's not worth taking as me and mine. So that's all in there as well, because it's like if it's suffering, why would we take it as me and mine? And then, so I'll just go through these inflection points. So first right striving, so we're preventing unarisen sensual thoughts, ill will thoughts, harmful thoughts. So guarding that first taste of Nibbana. So I've said that before. And then when we contemplate the noble truth of suffering, what we're understanding here is that everything that we construct dies. Because when we understand through the arising and passing away the true nature, then when we contemplate the noble truth of suffering, we realize everything that we construct actually gets broken. I mean, we see this in daily life when we think about certain things that are meant to last. Our loved ones, our pets, the houses that we build can be taken away. These bodies are very fragile. The food, also very fragile. It ages very quickly. So these are the things that when we're looking for happiness, that's what this is linked to, like karma asava, the taint of sensual desire. We're looking for long-lasting happiness. It's not in these things. First Noble Truth of suffering and our earlier meditation on the arising and passing away, seeing its true nature, the first step, it's compelling us to see it's lying to us. And so when we see it lying to us, then we know, well, Buddha has said Nibbana gives us the supreme happiness, the lasting happiness. And so we make that determination. So determination to realize Nibbana, not to be deceived by what we construct. And so that's how we enter into the concentration due to desire. We reach that. So it's not like these steps. First jhana, Dibbha, so the heavenly abiding, concentration due to desire. We don't actually do anything in those steps. We reach them through the earlier step. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. Then the last one is the restraint for sense faculties. This is about guarding that concentration. So I think I've mentioned that before. So guarding the concentration that desires Nibbana. So we don't want to contact the form again with our mind, the physical nutriment, because it'll just bring us out of this concentration. Okay, so that's 1.5 hours on the dot. So in our next session, we will start looking at the Metta Sahagata Sutta. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm not going to go super fast because I want to enjoy the process. There's a lot of suttas that are quite interesting that I put on the reading list for those who are interested. And if not, I'm going to go through some of them during our session. So next week, we will start looking at that sutta. And in the meantime, practice this Dukkha Patipada Danda Vinya, this first way to Nibbana, painful practice with slow realization. And we'll start looking at this new part next week. So let's pay gratitude to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Gratitude to the noble ones for helping us with this Dhamma. Gratitude to past and present teachers, parents, Kalyanamittas, anyone who has helped us on this path so far. If you want to dedicate any merit to any departed relatives, you can do so now. And we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. Wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.